Toby, here is the thing. AI is going to amplify what you have. So if you have a broken process, you are going to see that the process is broken way faster than before.
Welcome to another episode and series of Wicked Problems. I've been working in transformation, as I think most of you know, for a long time. And I thought it might be good to do a series on the different tools and methods that have made those transformations successful. So I'm going to be talking to various people who either came up with those tools or methods or have been working with them for a long time. I'm starting the series speaking to Sonya Siderova. Now, Sonya created a tool called NAVE, and NAVE is really, probably by a long country mile, the best tool I've ever come across for giving you the stats that you need to understand things like cycle time, lead time, how a team is performing within an agile transformation. It'll show you things like cumulative flow, how work is accumulating, how it's going. And they've recently updated it, which you'll hear when I talk to Sonya, with AI capabilities that enable it to really explain to people without giving you complex charts with lots of data in them, where the problems are and where they should go and look next. And that's really useful for teams in my experience. Sonya, as I said, is the founder of NAVE. She has a lot of experience, over a decade of experience in software development, product management, and importantly, process optimization. She is the founder and CEO at NAVE. That is a flow analytics platform, and it helps teams optimize workflow so that they can improve process efficiency, delivery times, and their own performance. As I say, I've used it in a number of different transformations, and it really has been a great tool for helping us get those insights that we can then work on together to make the transformation successful. Sonya, welcome to Wicked Problems. It's really great to have you here. I'm so excited to talk about NAVE and all the hard work that you guys do and where the market's going.
Thanks for having me, Toby.
Tell me and tell the viewers and listeners a little bit about the background of NAVE, how it came to be, what sort of got you going in the first place, and where you're at now, the journey, if you like.
Well, NAVE is a flow analytics platform, right? In its core, it's a process optimization tool. Essentially, that's what it is. If you have a process, if you have issues with delivering outcomes from that process, NAVE is going to be the solution for you to help you understand where the problems are, where things are slowing down, in terms of looking at the work itself, not really the people and the performance of the people, but the work and the different stages the work goes through. And one of the main concepts behind NAVE is really let people organize around the work in the most efficient way so that work can flow smoothly. The product itself has been on the market for probably 8 years now. And the whole journey was inspired from the fact that there are so many easy things, easy tweaks that you can do and tremendously improve the performance of your teams and the performance of the process altogether. And they're just invisible. You just don't see them. Sometimes, like when, let's say, a team is just slow to deliver, the instant reaction really is, let's push them work harder. Let's have them work overtime during the weekends, long hours. Whereas if we really see the flow of the work itself, we can actually see, hey, 70% of that time is actually staying and waiting. No one is doing anything about it. It could be approval, it could be a deployment cadence, it could be anything. So you can either push on those 30% active time, or you can go ahead and address those 70% of inactive time, right? So there are those little things that are not obvious, they're not visible. And NAVE helps with this. NAVE helps reveal all of that, all of those insights, all of those opportunities. And that's why I'm so excited to have it.
I've used it in various projects that I've been on in the past, and it really helps because, for practitioners like me, we use concepts like flow, right, or Kanban, where you, to your point, you're not trying to manage the people. I mean, there's a certain element of people management, but it's not about making people busier. because busier might get things done faster, which is a very natural human way to think, right? That we all, that's how I grew up in when I was first working. It's like, oh, well, if people just try a bit harder, we'll get a bit more done. And that feels really totally normal. But actually, counterintuitively, it's that thing like, creating whip limits. If you force less work through the system, actually it'll go through faster, and therefore more work will go through the system. But that doesn't sound very intuitive to people. So what I found with using NAVE, and I found it to be really, really good, because you can really visualize in data, and that's another thing people have to be comfortable with, is getting comfortable with looking at the data and understanding it. But once you got there, you can make so many great improvements, and you can see the effects of those improvements really quickly. And so what happens in my experience is that delivery becomes more predictable.
And it's a contradiction, Toby, because you do expect your people to be busy all the time, right? You do expect them to be fully utilized. And fact is, if you try to optimize for that, you are actually hindering the performance of your process. Because the more people are busy, the more work you start, the more work get put into the process. But the main thing that we all forget about is that we only realize return on investment as soon as the thing that we're working on is in the hands of our client, as soon as we finish it, as soon as we deliver it. So very often that mindset switch of stop starting and start finishing is a great blocker, and management is usually not really comfortable with it. But as soon as you can actually see the difference and you can see the results, then everything gets back to place. But initially, it's really a contradiction. It's really uncomfortable.
So it's kind of a steep learning curve for people in that way. They've got to get comfortable with understanding the data. So that's one side of it. That's the technical side. But then they've also got to get emotionally comfortable with doing things in a slightly different way. And that's maybe slightly harder actually than understanding the data. You can, sit down for a day and someone can explain what the data means in the different charts, and you'll probably get your head around that quite quickly. But then actually understanding why that's important on an emotional work-based level, and how to talk, because it changes your language as well, right? You're talking suddenly in a different language to people because you're talking about different things, and you're talking about, as you say, the process, not the people. So that really changes a lot for people. It creates quite a lot of dissonance at the beginning, I think.
Absolutely. And the reason is because we're so used to do things certain ways, right? We're used to managing people, as we talked about. We're used to making estimations in hours, in story points. It's just the way it's always has been. And the things that we talk about, the things that we really see working, concepts like Monte Carlo or probabilistic forecasting, they just switch the language. So you no longer talk about how much time something is going to take. You're talking about when something is going to be delivered. And working time and delivery time are totally different things, right? Just to give you an example, based on 10,000 workflows that we have analyzed inside NAVE, we've seen that active time or working time represents anything between 1 and 40% of the entire delivery time. Anything between 1 and 40%. So if you think about this, and now you think of, okay, how do we should we go ahead and estimate the complexity of the work and how much time would the effort take? It's just that part between 1 and 40%. What about the rest of the 60%? How about that? How can you predict that, right? So probabilistic forecasting is what solves that problem. Instead of asking when you will be done, you ask how much risk are you willing to take? Because the forecast is actually looking into your past performance data, the completion of the work, not the effort time, the actual delivery time. And it gives you a set of outcomes and the probability of hitting each of them. So a forecast would say, if you have, let's say, a feature that you would like to release and you do want to know when you will be able to release that feature, then a forecast is going to tell you, hey, there is a 50% chance that you will be done by 1st of June and 70%, 75% chance that you'll be done 1st of July, 95% by beginning of September. And it's up to you now to make that decision. How much risk are you willing to take? Would you like to commit to the 50th percentile or the 75th percentile, the 85th percentile? How bad it is going to be if you miss that deadline? And the most important thing of this approach, Toby, is that initial forecast is just that. It's the initial commitment that you have made before the work has been started. One of the main principles of probabilistic forecasting is that you have to reevaluate the forecast every other week. So in 2 weeks, you take into account what has been done, take into account what's the work that's still left, and you keep running the forecast and see, how that the chance of us hitting our initial target has changed. Is it the same? Is the percentile going up or down? And now you can make decisions based on that information. You can either change the scope, because I have to tell you, the scope is going to change. The conditions are going to change. They always do. New work is going to come in between. You'll find bugs. Things are going to drop off. Others will be added. That happens in 100% of the cases. So now you have to take into account your new conditions, the new scope, the remaining of the work, and the performance of the workflow, right? You have to keep into account how fast you're delivering work. So there are two components of that. First is the commitment that you're actually giving to your stakeholders and making decisions based on how that percentiles move up and down, and the performance of the workflow, right? So if it turns out that 60% of, or like 80% of the entire delivery time is waiting time, maybe the focus really need to go to resolving those blockers, right? Or if your teams and the workflow are working at an optimal performance, now you have to work with the scope, with the complexity of the work, all the all the details around that. And if at some point it turns out that you won't make it, at least you know and you can communicate that early. It's not like you figure that out 2 weeks before the deadline. You know now that things won't happen, and your stakeholders can now make decisions to reduce the risk of failure and the impact. So it's a negotiation point, I call it, where you have to make a decision. Do you want to cut the scope? Do you need more people? Do you want to move the date? Whatever it is, you know early. So you can see the whole language, the whole perspective around forecasting is different than the traditional methods of forecasting. And the language changes, as you mentioned. You said, okay, the language is no longer how much time do you need to finish something. The language is how much risk are you willing to take? And it's like development and estimation of that development process becomes a risk management procedure.
One of the really useful lessons I've got from having used NAVE in a as I say, in a couple of environments now, big environments, and over a long period of time. So there's a period there where there's a sort of maturing of experience, I guess. Is that, I don't know if that's a great way to put it, but you evolve your experience of the tool and you evolve your experience of the processes. And another aspect to it is, and this is a very Kanban principle, right? You break work down into smaller and smaller chunks, right? So that they become more and more, to a sense that they become more like the same shape, the same size, and therefore they become more predictable. So you're getting earlier warning that something's going to go wrong, but you're also kind of, in a way, imposing a whip limit because you're doing a certain amount in a certain period of time. And if you've got that period like a sprint of every 2 weeks, and you can start to see how much work you can get through in a 2 week period, and that work shape is roughly the same, you can start to say, well, there's a sort of 75, 80% probability that we will get all of this work done in that period. And that becomes more true as time goes on and you become more experienced looking at the data and understanding what's going on in the system.
Splitting work into equal sizes is one of the biggest misconceptions out there. You don't have to do that. And here is why. When it comes to splitting the work in smaller pieces, of course, that's a good thing. Of course, you have to strive to go for it, but you should never compromise the concept of value when you do that. So any piece that you have has to represent something that your end user can touch, can play with, can see. And the whole point really is for them to be able to give you feedback on it. So if you go ahead and split your work into backend, front-end, and UI, you're doing this wrong. So what I wanted really to say is, because you actually organize your work into pieces of value, they will naturally have different sizes, and you don't want to compromise on that. What you do want, though, is to have the policies in place to preserve the consistency of your delivery. What does this mean? If you have something big and you're not able to split it, you're not able to just cut from the scope, there is absolutely no way to go for it in pieces. It is just big, it's just complex, there is nothing that you can do about that. In order to preserve that consistency and make your process and your forecasts more reliable, you have to adjust your policies around it. So what does this mean? This means, for example, instead of one person, you're going to have 3 people work on it. Instead of letting other work jump in between and then stop the work on that big piece, you just hold all the rest of the work until that big piece is done. What this means is that if there is blockers, bottlenecks, anything that would prevent the flow of that work, you go ahead and address them firsthand. So you can have different sizes of the work. The most important thing when you shape the size of the work is to keep that value, the concept of value. And from then on, as soon as you see that the work is going above a certain threshold, you go ahead and take action. You make sure that you have the policies in place to change the way you work in order to make sure that the piece of work is just going ahead and finishing as soon as possible. So what I was trying to say is that it's not really about the size of the work, like the predictability of the process and the reliability of your forecast do not depend on the size of the work. They depend on the process policies that you have to manage the work in the most efficient way, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think value is really is the key. So when I was talking about the size, to some degree, I think there is an element of if I can split the task into 2, it might be useful for me to do that. If I can't, I can't. But you're right. There has to be delivery of value in everything that's being done, or why are we doing it? There's like no point in doing it if there's no value to that piece of work, to the customer, whoever that might be. You can almost put an economic lens on this and say, with cost of delay, for example, and there are different ways of measuring cost of delay, of course, and that can help you understand what you're going to prioritize first. And yes, it will come in different sizes because, something might be worth $1 million to a company in a year, or it might be worth 100 million to a company in a year. And the complexity of something worth 100 million, sometimes it might not be that much more complex than the thing worth $1 million, but there will be times when, of course, it will be much more complex.
Absolutely. So the complexity of the work, the nature of the work, the cost of delay, any risk assessment, anything related with the risk that the business is trying to manage, those are decisions that have to be made when you prioritize the work. When you make a decision, what's the next thing that the team has to handle? Once you make that decision and once the thing is put into the process, it's really about optimizing the flow of work. So that thing that's considered as the most important thing right now can go out of the system as soon as possible in a way that's like with higher quality and meeting all the standards. So very important point that you're making.
And another area that NAVE can help with, because one of the things what you're talking about there is we've got to resolve the blockers, and in a sense, what that leads to, naturally, is the bottlenecks, right? And so what NAVE can help us do is say, here's where the current biggest bottleneck is. Okay, we might want to go and investigate that and see, why is that a bottleneck? Is it we need a different policy between two departments? Is it that we didn't realize that things were queuing up? Or, what is it we've only got one tester when we should have three testers because we got, 150 developers and three testers isn't going to cut it. So what is it that's causing the bottleneck? Thank you. I can see that now because I've got, my process mapped out and I've got it mapped into NAVE, and that's giving me that information.
Oh, yes. And I have to tell you, one of our core principles here at NAVE is continuous improvement, and we have embedded it in the product. So it's really mind-blowing to see all of the teams together, and then you can actually understand what's the biggest thing that's impacting all of them. So sometimes you can actually figure out, all right, from all the blockers that we have, internal dependencies, external dependencies, let's say not enough expertise in certain areas, or unplanned work. And you can actually see throughout all of your teams, what's the one thing that is causing the majority of the delays. And now you know what the priorities are, because you will figure out tens of things that you can go ahead and optimize for. But what's the number one thing or the top three things that affect the most the delivery times of those teams? Now you know what's the number one thing that you have to go ahead and address right away. And for the change agents and for the Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, this is gold, because you can go ahead and from the first meeting, you can address the biggest thing that's going to move the needle for the entire business. And that's the language that management is actually aware of. That's the language that they understand. So it's a great benefit.
It's a great benefit to the organization because suddenly things are flowing faster, or more, there's more value coming through the system, but also for the agile practitioner who is able now to show their value as well, because they're able to solve all these big problems that people have found sort of intractable and sticky and unable to get.
One of the things that we really wanted to make clear for all of the agile practitioners is that when they have the analysis of the past performance data of the teams, they can associate certain events and things that have changed with a certain improvement that they're actually seeing. So let's say a month ago, you actually implemented WIP limits. You reduced the work with 35%. A month later, you can see that cycle time reduced by 50% just because of that. And now you can see, you have a proof that can actually showcase the value of the work, right? It can showcase the return on investment of the work that you've been doing. And it's just amazing because people don't see those improvements. And sometimes they're so dramatic. I've always say every time when we have like a retro, we always start celebrating all the wins that we have. That's a must. And you have to see those wins. That's like a huge part of the process, in my opinion.
Oh, I think so. And not done enough, and it's very easy to not celebrate the wins and then the wins get forgotten about. Whereas you've got to celebrate them. I just wanted to touch on AI because we're talking about here. You've got process. We might have a bottleneck somewhere, and upstream of that bottleneck, you might be having people wanting to implement AI, and downstream of that bottleneck, you might be having people wanting to implement AI, or maybe even try and solve the bottleneck itself, although that's not always going to be possible because some bottlenecks are imposed deliberately. For example, regulatory bottlenecks where you have to have a human review, for example. I've seen you write some posts on LinkedIn. I might link to one of those under the show notes if that's okay. But what's your view on AI and how that could be impacting things like flow of work?
I'm obviously a huge fan. I believe that this is just the next level for everything that we've been doing, not just management work. Specifically when it comes to flow management, and it's something that we've already integrated in the platform, AI would help in a lot of different perspectives. For our specific use case for the product at NAVE, what we've done is we've enabled an agent that would go ahead, check all of your historical data, and then create a narrative for you. So it would kind of translate the numbers into a narrative. And the whole point behind this really is, instead of like for you to be able to read the charts, to understand the ins and outs of Kanban, if you will, flow management, and everything else in between, you can just go ahead and just understand what the problem is. So AI is going to take like different numbers. It is going to take your arrival and departure rates. It is going to take your cycle time trend in the past 3 months. It is going to check your WIP and how that changed over time. It's going to check your throughput, flow efficiency, work in progress age, due date performance. All those flow metrics, it is going to go ahead, try to understand the behavior, and it is going to connect the dots, and it will tell you why is that happening and what's the number one thing that you have to focus on right now and why. It's going like, we have enabled the entire reasoning and all of that. Now, what's the difference with and without it? Now you have the narrative. As soon as you check the team, as soon as you have all of the teams, you understand where the problem is. And I love this so much because you no longer have to spend your time trying to understand and translate the numbers. Your job now really is to focus on the change work. It's focusing on the conversations, focusing on the strategy, on the mindset shifts, really doing the thing that I believe change agents had to do from the very beginning.
I think that's amazing because I talked earlier about, once you can sit down, you can learn the charts and you can learn the data and how to read it. Not everyone in management is going to want to do that. And if me as a change agent comes along and says, hey, look at this histogram, or, look at this cumulative flow diagram, they might look at me as if I'm some kind of creature from another planet. But instead, I can go very quickly from having done, run the AI in your system and go, here's the narrative. This is why we need to do this. And this is why we need to do this next. That's a much easier conversation, right? It's a much more human level conversation, albeit that AI has helped enable that.
The narrative is in an outcome language. It's in a language that they would understand. Now your job is how to approach the situation, right? Because AI is going to tell you, hey, your work in progress is like 300% over your capacity. You have to reduce the amount of work and you have to stop all new initiatives. But you cannot just go there and say, hey, we stop all of the work that you guys have planned, right? That's politics. That's the conversation that you have to be strategic about. And that's what you have to think about now. That's the job that you have to do now.
But what you can do very quickly, what it's giving you is that information. We're 300% over capacity. We need to have a grown-up conversation about, can we stop something, or can we abandon something, or what do we do about reprioritization and so on, in order to get that problem resolved.
But to your point, instead of showing them a histogram or a CFD, you just go ahead and say, hey, if we don't stop all of that work that's in the queue now, your cycle times or your delivery time will be 3 times slower, and it's going to happen in less than 4 weeks. Now the conversation changes completely, right? And that's what I mean when I say it's a next level experience now, because you just get to the point quickly and you prove your expertise right away, because it's all black and white. No one can argue with numbers.
One of the things maybe we should just touch on quickly is the pitfalls of using AI upstream of a bottleneck.
Toby, here is the thing. AI is going to amplify what you have, right? So if you have a broken process, you are going to see that the process is broken way faster than before. So in that perspective, I don't think that the conversation has changed at all, because companies still need to make good decisions. They still need to optimize the way they do business. And AI would probably help at some point, but there are things like regulations, decision-making, dependencies. AI won't be able to handle those, at least not at that first stage. So it's still a lot of things that we have to think about. Let's say you are having a process and you analyze the process. It turns out that the main bottleneck of it is like the approval process. You can have AI for your development teams. You can make them like 20 times faster, but that won't change that approval time, right? It is going to actually become even a bigger bottleneck now because you've increased the speed of the upstream, but now there is that block to the downstream that's just getting bigger and bigger.
So you're overwhelming a bottleneck that already exists.
Yes. And the good thing, in my opinion, because I love messy pictures, every time when I see a messy picture and someone says, I do want to hide this and this and that, I'm always saying, why? I love those pictures because now you see all the opportunities for improvement and you see them right away. You know what has to happen so that in a month or so, that picture doesn't look like this anymore, right? The best thing is that you will be able to see the bottlenecks clearly and undeniably way faster than before. And I think the need of actually solving those bottlenecks will be even more painful right now.
This is, I think, something that could be really useful to people because there's been quite a few reports come out recently. There was one by Atlassian recently. There was another one from MIT. I think Oxford University came out with a similar report with some horrific numbers about AI initiatives hitting problems. And, you know, a lot of this it could be down to the fact that people are maybe optimizing the wrong things. And actually, if they have a tool like NAVE, implement, they can see why those problems are there. What is it amplifying? Oh, it's amplifying these things. Right, maybe we need to restructure how we're going to use AI within our implementation. So I think that's amazing.
Absolutely. Sequence make sense. You have to understand how the different problems that you see are impacting the outcomes that you're after. And the one that has the biggest impact is the number one priority for you. It's that simple. If you try to optimize the wrong thing, of course you won't see the results that you're after. It's really straightforward. So I guess the fact that you don't have visibility to all of those problems and having the ability to understand the most important one you really have to focus on is the biggest challenge for all of the businesses out there right now.
If people want to learn more about NAVE, I'll put a link under, but where should they go if they want to learn more about the tool and the work that you do?
Getnave.com. And if you do want to continue that conversation, find me on LinkedIn. I would love to get in touch.
Okay, so maybe I can put a link to your LinkedIn profile as well in the show notes.
Thanks, Toby. It was a pleasure.